Hello everyone, Revan619 here. How the devil are you? In today's video, I wanted to update my weapon tier list now that DLC 3 and the hotfixes have dropped. With no major changes looking to come on the horizon until DLC 4, which probably won't be till September or later, I think it'd be a good time to start revising them. With no further ado, let's start talking about how some of these positions have changed based on what we've received in patches and the DLCs, especially considering the 1.5 gave us a lot of new talents and origin changes. Starting at the bottom, Webbers are still a niche build. Now, I don't call them below average, because below average means that they don't really perform at their intended role. Webbers do perform at their intended role. The problem is their intended role just isn't very good. Slowing down enemy movement doesn't really matter in a game where you sort of one-turn turbo kill anything anyway, so you don't need to worry about that kind of CC. Even boosting the damage for flamers doesn't matter because it only boosts the burn tick, not the actual fire damage. Moving on to the Omnissiah axes, the problem with Omnissiah axes is they're only really usable by Eogun and Pascal, and they aren't melee builds. They don't have talents for melee, they don't have abilities for melee, and the only way that you can make them viable in melee is to abuse OP items, where you could say with Pascal put Wanderer's Portent in his offhand so he can make infinite attacks as long as he crits. But then you'd also need something like the Inertia boots to give him infinite movement, so it's just, there's a lot of bugs you have to exploit to make it useful, and it doesn't really work as a build. Even the Cerebral Inverters, they're red herrings. They don't really improve the playstyle, because the issue was never the fact that you didn't have stats, because you could always infinitely buff. The issue has always been that you don't have talents, and you don't have abilities. Moving on to the Drukhari Splinter Pistols. I would say they are actually performing better than they were before. This is going to be mostly due to the fact that you now have Agony that you can put onto them, which is one of the new talents to up their damage. As a pistol, they do have fairly usable rate of fire, and they do have constant upgrades coming in starting at Act 2, seeing stuff in Act 3 and Act 4. So I say we could put them in the average thing, and I would say we could put them up to around the same way auto rifles perform. You might even be able to argue that they perform better than auto rifles because they have a little bit more supporting talents, but I don't think I would put them much higher than that. Because their base of rate of fire is actually so high, there's actually less rate of fire gear that you can apply to them. So yeah, they're not too bad. I would say that you could do the same with Aldari pistols, which I don't think I have on this chart if I look around. I have the rifle there, but I don't see the pistol. But they'll perform about the same with deadly accuracy. They'll outperform the what you'll see on the auto rifles, but they won't outperform what you see in the tiers above. Next up, bolt pistols. Yep, still below average, and there's still nothing that really uses them. Yes, you can put them on a priest, and they do good damage with a lot of buffs, but their main issue is they are limited by ammo capacity and have to constantly reload and don't really benefit from rate of fire, which makes them the worst rate of fire weapon in the game. Now, you could argue that they do better than any other single shot in the tier, so you could maybe say they should be here, but I can't stress enough just how overall bad these weapons are. Still one of the bottom tier weapons that there is, but they are still a burst weapon nonetheless, and I did just spot the Aldari pistol there, so we can move that up because they have much higher capacity for their ammo, so yes, we can pop them up here as well. You might even be able to say they actually out damage them a little bit, though the upgrades that you get for them is less. Next up, we have the Heavy Melters. Now, you do have a new Heavy Melter variant, so I would say that they actually do outperform a lot of the single fire stuff, but they're still 2 AP, and the upgrade for it is it's just damage. There's still no effects to it. So they've improved, but they've not improved by much. As for the Aldari Melter Rifles, they are still single shot and they have no area, but being a single shot weapon that you only need the Aldari talent for, they are actually a lot better than they were before, but overall still not the best. They have seen a big improvement because of the fact that you can now use them more effectively, and especially because now you have the Spark version, but overall they're just not a very strong weapon type. Same applies to needle pistols. It is a single shot pistol. No build really benefits from them, and single shot is just weaker than burst in area. Same will apply to Neurodisruptor, which you get late of Act 4. The Hex rifles, again, not very good because single shot weapon and there isn't really much going on with it. Now, we have seen a boost to flamers. So flamers flamers can now be used in melee, which is pretty good. The flame pistol itself hasn't improved at all because of that, but we can say that the undertakers are now actually more powerful because they can be used in melee. So if you did want to do some gimmicky melee setups, you could use them for it. They still do underperform compared to what you have for other area weapons, but they are better now, so I do think we need to move them up a tier. As for melter rifles, yep, we can use them in melee, so potentially we could say that the heavy version now goes above the regular one, but I still think that that 2 AP cost is a bit much. So it is hard to say where we want to put them when it comes to terms with the flame pistols. Flame pistols you can just get on and use quite easily. Rifles not only require talents like the pistols, but can be used in melee now, but it's still 2 AP. You will actually get more damage out of the heavy melter than you will the flame pistols, and there aren't that many exceptional endgame variants. When we then compare it to, say, the Desolation rifles, I would say the Desolation rifles do in fact actually now drop under it. We can still get area talents to them, so they will outperform what you'll be able to do with the rifles, but overall they're still not the best. It does require Drukhari weapons to proficiency, but you can boost a lot to it. Looking more onto it, Aeldari chainswords, we don't actually get that many, so I would say that has to go down a tier list. The Aeldari power swords, whilst we have more, they still don't really have many endgame variants, and there is now a force sword that you can get at the endgame, but this is directly at the end of Act 5. If we look at the Inferno pistol, yep, the encrypted Inferno pistol is still only 1 AP, which is actually very nice to see. But the main issue that we have with it is, yeah, there's still no upgrades. We get one in Act 2 and then one in Act 5. But beyond that, they're just, yeah, they're very few and far between. So it's very hard to justify them. Now, being 1 AP area burst, I would actually prefer to use them over the bolt pistols, which have about the same level of upgrades as them. So these guys are competing for the below average spot down here. When it comes to the Aeldari burst rifles, there is still not really any upgrades. You just have the vanilla version in Act 2. So I would say that it doesn't deserve to go up. Whereas daggers, I've been enjoying daggers more. There are quite a few really nifty abilities for daggers, so I would actually move them up a tier. Yes, some of the stronger ones that you are going to be wanting to look at is going to be the Aeldari and the Drukhari one, but daggers overall, I don't hate them anymore. So yeah, I've now moved them up to the average slot. They are directly worse than using for, say, a sword or an axe, but they do counteract the negatives that you see on Killing Edge. The only reason that they don't perform better, despite having some really good effects, is the fact that Blade Dancer can't use them. We did get Shearing Strikes and Rigorous Training fixed for warriors. However, Stalker's Boots still don't work with Rigorous Training, so this is holding them back for even being more useful on a niche build. But yeah, daggers, whilst they don't do that much, I wouldn't say that they're below average anymore, though they are definitely below the other melee weapons. The other single shot rifles that don't really have any very powerful versions is obviously the carbine and the needle rifle. I think that these are gimmicks, and I don't think that you really put them on any build. Sometimes an officer might use one if you don't have any stronger single shot weapons, but it's not one that you would put there because you had a choice. Flamers can now be used in melee, so they are better than they were before, but they are still heavily support weapons that are directly worse than shotguns. So I don't think it's fair to put them above anything in the tiers above them, and the melee weapons have a lot more support than they do, so it is not really fair to say that they are now better than them. So axes and swords are pretty good, but these are very vanilla for the primitive versions, and I would say that the auto guns with rate of fire gear do outscale them. Now that we can get Act 4 versions, I would say that the Aeldari, especially with Deadly Accuracy and Agonizing Pain, yep, these guys are pretty good. They're not exactly something I would go out of my way to build for, but it is something that you can now use. Lad sniper rifles are still very good because, yes, they can target enemies and do quite well with it. But having additional hit chance and additional dodge reduction is very good. We now have versions in Act 1, Act 2, there's an upgrade in Act 4 as well as Act 5. So these are now more usable all the way through the game, and you will see some really good ones like the Deadly Repeater. The Drukhari splinter rifles that you see in Act 3, yeah, they're pretty good, and with rate of fire, they are quite usable. I am highly debating, now that the ricochet augment exists, do we even want to argue that these are better? However, I will leave that for you intrepid adventurers in the discussions to debate over. Now, with the advent of the fact that now when you can increase damage with additional things coming onto the rune cannons and the splinter cannons, they are quite a bit more powerful than they were. However, I still don't think that we can put them above average. The reason I put them in average is I think they are going to set the benchmark for what a heavy gun looks like in this part of the act, and they are very strong with rate of fire gear. The only problem I can't put them above average is I don't think that they outperform anything in the tier above them, whereas they do quite well here. Sniper rifles themselves have seen a boost because now we have ricochet augments, we also have cruel fate, and there are a few ways that we can abuse them. The problem is they don't really progress beyond Act 2. With the later Act versions, it could even be argued that it's better to go with the lad sniper rifles, but I still think that the abilities that you will see on the regular sniper rifles, some people might argue they are better. So I will again leave that discussion for you guys to have in the comments. Now, before we talk about plasma weapons with new talents, I think we do need to talk about this little guy here, an arc rifle. I think arc rifles with the new talents and especially the new augments are exceptionally powerful, and we are now seeing even more ways to abuse them, especially with the bug that can allow you to get to level 55 in Act 1. I'm not going to use that to tier that, but in terms of overall strength, I think this needs to go straight up into the strongest weapons. The talents are just too good, not just on say Pascal or Eogun, but even a rogue trader, and especially with fixed assassin and bounty hunter, this is exceptionally powerful. The only thing that you have to keep in mind is arc rifles, unlike sniper rifles, don't have additional hit chance and additional dodge reduction, so they can feel quite bad in early game when you miss, but that's just whilst you're building your stats. If we talk about plasma guns, we have to mention that when Pascal uses them because of overcharge protocols, he does break the game. He breaks the game by the fact that every shot, reload, and kill will increase it by a multitude of 10 plus his intelligence, so these guys stack really powerful. You then have something like the Ragefire plasma gun, which can additionally stack a lot of extra damage. The plasma pistols, when dual wielded, have a lot of really good and interesting effects, and it does get harder and harder to think where they need to be in the tier list. I would put them above Drukhari Claves, mostly just because there aren't any builds that really want to use Drukhari Claves, but they're not weak. If you stack them with Bleed, you can get really high dodge, but there aren't very good options to progress them. So these ones are here mostly not because of performance, but because of their availability. Kind of the same with why I don't put Rune Cannon and Splinter Cannons higher, because they are harder to obtain. You can't really build for them because you don't see them until Act 3, and this is kind of the same with the Claves. You do get some in Act 2, but they're not better than the other weapons you have around then, and by the time you get to later acts, the other weapons are vastly outscaling them. When it comes to plasma pistols, the 5 new talents are exceptionally powerful. So we have the ability to lower the cost of reload on non-soldier builds. We have a lot of talents that will apply to increase their damage, both on Blade Dancer, Warrior, as well as the usual soldier. And with the operative buffs, they are a lot more usable. These guys are really strong when it comes to terms of single shot. Now, some people might want to argue that we need to move plasma pistols down and potentially even get them below some of the burst. The thing is, I just think their utility is too good to move them down because it's just the average effectiveness that you'll see on them. You do have some talents that will increase your damage and stop your weapons from overcharging on some plasma pistols, as well as being able to pair them with 2 abilities. I really like them, but I can understand why people might argue to say place them here. I think it would be a discredit to what their potential is. The same with plasma rifles. I can't put them higher than this. If we were talking about Pascal, then yes. But in terms of comparing them to other burst weapons, it does feel bad to put these above any burst weapons because burst is king in terms of damage. The only reason the other ones are lower is just due to availability. These guys are available in Act 1. You can build for them in Act 1. You can progress. The others, you're talking about Act 2, Act 3. So you really have to min-max an entire run around planning to use them. Whereas plasma pistols, you can pick up on the fly. Someone playing on their first run, even as a warrior, might just give Abelard the plasma talents and put this in his offhand, and they'll do absolutely fine with that. Chainswords. So chainswords are one of my favourite weapon types in the game, but I just feel like you stop progressing with them in Act 4. They're very good in the early game, though you'll be outperformed by even a primitive weapon in the Noble Sword. In Act 2, that you get the Anvar chainsword, which is really strong, but you'll quickly get outperformed by Epiphany. And then as you get into even the end of Act 2, the chain axes start outperforming them. I think that they are the top contender to what you should compare other melee weapons to. So I do think they are very solid. We've discussed what I think about the Rune Cannon and Splinter Cannon. Honestly, some people will argue that these guys should be above Heavy Stubbers. The only difference is Stubbers you get access to in Act 1, you'll see upgrades in Act 2, and you'll have a few variations of upgrades in Act 2, and in Act 4 you'll see some very good finishes, and the same with Act 5. You might, on a pure min-max basis, be able to get a Rune Cannon to outperform either Righteous Anger or the Advanced Heavy Stubber, but it won't be by enough that I think it's a game changer, and like I said, due to just lack of availability, it feels bad to put either of these guys above what you get with the Heavy Stubber just because it's constantly progressing. And depending on what build you compare it to, yes, the best option for both of them is actually going to be Astra Military Commander. You would use it with Artificer Power Armor on Arc Militant with Field of Fire, so every attack increases your rate of fire. So both of them will reach their maximum rate of fires very quickly. The low base damage with Deadly Accuracy can be mitigated a bit because of those critical damages. I just feel like the aesthetics are better on the Stubbers, but I can understand why people would make arguments otherwise. In terms of Drukhari daggers, the finesse talent makes these very good for warrior builds, and I do think they do perform above other dagger builds. Now, it's probably only fair to point out, because these don't apply to blade dancers, these daggers are pretty much only really going to be used for Drukhari builds, and it's going to be for warriors. So because of how niche it is, I really should move this down a tier list, because most builds that are going to use it probably could actually outperform with the chainswords, and it's mostly only going to be the assassin builds that like to use this, though it is still also very strong for a Shearing Strikes Executioner build. So I am definitely on the fence if I should be moving this below the burst weapons, because the burst weapons will outperform it, but it's just the fact that there is a lot that you can do with them. So whether or not they should be above average or below average depends on how you look at it. If it's just in terms of comparing all weapons to each other, then you probably do need to move it down to below chainswords. But if you're comparing to how much it adds to just builds in general compared to the regular dagger, it is something that is above average, but only at the bottom of it. So this one is going to be based on how you debate it, and I can very much understand how this positioning can be a point of contention. But if you've seen any of my Knife Lord builds where you can have a Castigator or a Crime Lord or even Mirazhai doing a Death Aura Assassin build using daggers and Shearing Strikes, you'll see that the raw damage is really powerful, especially if you use the Hitari Blade of Bloodthirst with Lilithian's Fury in the other hand. So that's the custom Aeldari and Drukhari daggers. You can stack both of them with finesse, and then the effects of them are very strong. There are some incredibly powerful direct damage endgame versions of these daggers that you get in the terms of the Heart Piercer. Moving on to Aeldari sniper rifles, this does include the Wanderer's Portent and the Eye of Heticon. Now that we can use those two weapons with the ricochet augment, they are very powerful. I would like to say that the lads version is better, but because of the ricochet augment with the overpen of these guys, you can get a lot of attacks, and there are a few gimmickly bug build setups that you can abuse with, say, Pascal and Eogun that also uses Wanderer's Portent, but even Neuralit, now that Operative has been fixed, she does benefit greatly from them. Deadly Accuracy does apply, so whilst Deadly Accuracy is better for burst builds, it is still very strong here. I think these guys deserve to be up where they are, and potentially I'd even say that they now outweigh Heavy Flamers because of the ricochet augment. In terms of flamers, yep, Heavy Flamer does perform better than the other flamers, and I could understand how some people might want to argue, well, how does this thing outperform any of the burst weapons? So you might think it should be down here. My main argument for that is all the heavy weapon talents do apply to the Heavy Flamer. So in terms of just sheer killing power, whilst it does less damage than those options below it, it will kill far more. it will just be able to point out, and it was the reason why this was above here. When I use this on Argenta, she can do a 5k flamer shot that will take out a good chunk of enemies, especially with all of her priest buffs, but this is going to be unique to priest and not overall, whereas the Aeldari sniper rifle, I think it deserves to go up because of the ricochet augment, because it can be used on more origins. In terms of the power pick, I still think the power pick is better than chainswords, mostly because of just how strong they are. The armor pen's really good. You can almost one-shot Aurora on Unfair if you stack up the right kind of charge for Abelard. Power picks are just highly underrated. I think they are exceptionally strong, and then unique attack, whilst it is 2 AP, can be used for great effectiveness. Next up, we have Power Swords. Epiphany is doing a lot of heavy lifting. The Epiphany in Act 2 can allow Warrior Charge to reset a charge, which is exceptionally strong. We also have some very good effects, such as being able to ignore parts of armor and deflection on some other Power Swords, and I can understand why some people might want them to be argued lower, but I think the fact that some of their unique effects are so high, we do have to put them above average. They have fairly good armor pen, but it's those unique effects, all of them are good. You have if you go through on the wiki the list of the power swords, you might not use all of them, but if you look at their effects, you'll think, well, damn, I should be using them. Next up, we have some pistols. Now, I rate pistols a lot higher than other people. In terms of killing power, I think faux hammer, especially shotgun pistols, are really good. But with some of the changes lately, I do feel like they are starting to be less valuable, in my opinion, because I think a lot of power creep is coming in here. Their killing power is good, and I would say it's better than Aeldari daggers, and there is a good amount of them, and they are very good for offhand fleet combat training builds that can use the warrior talents like crowd kill, and it will stack up damage to it. On a soldier in general, though, I'm not sure why you would use a shotgun pistol over a regular shotgun, so I feel like it does need to go down quite a bit. If we look at the regular burst pistols, these are exceptionally powerful. They have very good damage that will be in play from the get-go, like if you use the Ripper in Act 1, and then you'll get some of the upgrades in Act 2, and in eventually even going to Act 4, you'll have stuff like the Daredevil pistol. These guys are always going to be good, but the reason that I rate them so highly, whereas other people would rate them lower, is the fact that because they are rate of fire 4 and below, which unlike the Drukhari and Aeldari pistols are above 5, this means you can use the Temperis Elite Carapace backpack to boost them, as well as other rate of fire gear, so you don't need to compete with gear with other companions. Weapons that you require to take the compensator gloves to make them more useful means you're directly gimping your party, because that means Solomon, Jay, and Argenta lose access to them, and all of their strongest builds use them. So to put them on your rogue trader is directly hurting the party, which is kind of why I don't like these weapons. Whereas the other weapons, you don't need to do that. I put them below Laz because Laz can have a much higher ammo capacity, so they can burst a lot more as you build up rate of fire, especially on an Arc Militant build, and the fact that with Trench Warfare you can get a 40% rate of fire boost, so you will actually get more from Laz pistols than you will the solid state pistols, and they're also just very good for even things like Commissar to buff his allies by having low base damage. Revolvers. This is an interesting spot. One of the reasons I put them up here is they were exceptionally powerful with degraded defense, especially if you're using Bone Shatterer and if you were also using the anti-vehicle revolver. Just exceptionally powerful. Now, with the 90% damage nerf to them, I do think that their value has drastically dropped because that 6 rate of fire does heavy limit them. It's the exact same argument for bolt pistols. So I think with that in mind, I do need to drop them down as well, just because they have lost a lot of value and they are limited by their ammo sizes. I would say that yes, you now, because of that and the nerf to degrade defense, you'll just greatly outperform them with the higher rate of fire weapons that can get more hits in. They're not bad, they still perform above average, and due to the fact that you can get like 6 shots on an anti-vehicle revolver, yeah, that will do a lot more just because of sheer damage than the Aeldari ones, but eventually they could outscale them if you put on all the rate of fire gear because of their low ammo sizes, which is why I feel like they need to drop down the higher tier, but for the average builder, I would still keep them up here. Next up, we have two-handed greatswords. Now, this is going to be for the power variant, and though the primitive version you'll probably have to sneak in with here. Yes, I think they're very good. The advantage of power weapons is not only just the 2 AP area attack, which is very wide and has a lot of killing power, they also get double strength scaling. Now, their effects are worse than the one-handers, but the two-handed viability of them is what makes them very good. Now, Ogryn arms, you can equip them both in one hand, and you do keep their full damage scaling since the changes. However, overall, losing the area attack actually makes them weaker, so I don't recommend Ogryn arm builds. Whereas with the power hammers, some of them have much better effects. They have a lot more knockdown. They have that unique attack to really yeet people with it. And even if you put them on the Ogryn arms build, there are some weapons that will apply a status from one of the power weapons that the secondary power hammer will actually increase its damage if the first one succeeds. One of this is the ability to knock down enemies on a single target attack if they fail a check, and then the offhand will increase the damage against knockdown enemies. So it's a very powerful combination that you can use there. Chain axes are exceptionally powerful. Whilst they get less parry than the chain swords, their damage is higher, their armor pen is higher, and you have some incredibly strong variants like the hardened chainsaw, but most notably Carnage, which you get in Act 2, which increases its critical damage with every hit, and this will scale up to 100 stacks, so it is exceptionally powerful. It's not as strong as some of the Power Axe variants, but that's mostly because of Tearing Vengeance. Obviously, Tearing Vengeance is what stops this going up even higher, and it is exceptionally strong. I think you could make arguments to say that it's better than some of the Power Mauls, but on average they are weaker. It's just the top end is better than the top end of the other. In terms of power mauls, there are a lot of them. Arbiters do uniquely buff them, and I do think there is a lot of really good options for them. I do like dual wielding them and using the 1 AP knockback attacks, and you do have a lot of options of that from Act 1 going all the way into Act 4. Melee weapon specialist does make me overvalue these guys more, because it means I can make offhand attacks 1 AP, which you can't do with the other variants because their special attacks are locked by Ogryn arms if you dual wield them. Now, shotguns. A lot of people don't like shotguns. I think they are fantastic. Shotguns are the strongest area weapon. The flamers are a direct downgrade of shotguns, and melters are a direct downgrade of shotguns. So it's very easy to see above average, average, below average. I think they directly apply. Shotguns are very good. You can take shotgun mastery to use them with a shield. I did like the dual weapon shotgun build, but dual weapon combat is highly bugged with shotgun mastery, and often you don't get that second offhand attack. If you use something like Finest Hour, you can't use both shotguns anyway. But the big standout for this is double barreled shotgun with gunnery shield just to do exceptional damage. I really like them. Some people might be able to argue that actually shotguns perform less than these, but I just think because of the trash killing power, the fact that you kill more is more beneficial to the fact that these damage more. But how you weight that, again, this is going to be an argument that I leave to you guys in the audience. Heavy Stubber. When I was discussing with another co-build creator, he was very upset that I had put Heavy Stubbers above the Aldari stuff and above the Drukhari stuff. The reason for this is mostly just accessibility. So you get access to the Stolen Autocannon in Act 1, you'll get access to the Heavy Stubber and the Calibrated Heavy Stubber in Act 2, you'll also have access to the Equalizer in Act 2. After Act 3, and you go into Act 4, you'll get access to the Advanced Heavy Stubber and the Righteous Anger. Now, these guys on paper will outperform the rune cannon if you're not adding in the compensator gloves. Because they're both above rate of fire 5, you can't use the Temperis Carapace Elite Backpack, and that both builds want the compensating gloves. The problem is that means you have to take away the compensator gloves from just better weapon tiers. So if anyone in your party, which is one of the most highly competitive items in the game, and it's the reason why Argenta makes Allfire redundant in terms of the burst fire arms race, both of them want it. I would say the only reason I put these above average is just that they're always there. They're not an Act 3 and end of Act 4 exclusive weapon like the Rune Cannon. I think at the ultimate min-max, Rune Cannon will actually out-damage it, especially with deadly accuracy, but just for playability and how useful they are to build, you're just going to constantly have that, and you're not having to take 3 extra talents to even equip it. So because of that, I would say that for me, these just outperform, even though the arguments for damage, that might very well be true, but my AMC who's using this with Field of Fire, he don't care. He's still maxing out his shots and he's doing 1 AP burst thanks to the Artificer power armor. With the priest changes, I think it's very fair to say that that bolters, regular bolters, are now in strongest weapons. Their damage is just insane. Yeah, especially for a priest. Hymn of Vehemence is currently bugged. We're not going to base this on the fact that you can get a 270 single shot firearm mastery on the Hymn of Vehemence, but with every other upgrade and the fact that it does slowly upgrade throughout the game, yeah, bolters are probably in the strongest weapon tier. Surprisingly, las weapons also went up a whole ass tier. The reason why las weapons went up a whole ass tier is the Necrontech las tech now comes to you in Act 4. We also have some new las weapons, though not very many, because we got the Zarkov las rifle, but the upgrades to Astra Militarum Commander, Field of Fire, and the 40% damage burst, as well as some of the new augments, make them much easier to use than before. So yes, las weapons are still top tier. Yes, bolters do out damage them, specifically on a priest, but overall, because of the amount of fire that you can get, the sheer rate of fire will allow you to, on most points in the game, nearly all of the game until end game, you'll always do more on a las rifle because they would just be able to build up rate of fire easier and more, and it doesn't require compensator gloves as much as the bolters do. Whereas the bolters can also benefit from Temperis Elite Carapace Backpack, so can these, as well as the gloves of Rapid Desolation. So these two are both top tier contenders. Depending on if you're playing Astra Militarum Commander, you go las. If you're playing Priest, you go bolter. But if you're going bolter, we're going to talk about his big brother later. One weapon type that has been a big surprise has been arc rifles. With the new talents that came to us, these are just really effective. You can use them to create infinite attacks on an assassin build or a bounty hunter build. Very useful for an operative, and it's even incredibly strong for a soldier. This can be used with the new Cerebral Inverter MK Tactician to stack up over 1,000 intelligence, which makes all the extra damage from this and the arcs just completely map clear. It is insane how strong this is, and it is by far the strongest single shot weapon in the game. Just keep in mind, it might feel a little bit bad in the early game because unlike sniper rifles, it doesn't have additional hit chance and additional dodge chance, so you do need to build up your stats more, and you need to be very aware that you are shooting within your range, because otherwise you lose half your hit chance. Whenever you're discussing melee builds, Tearing Vengeance and Sanguine Thirst kind of make every other weapon redundant. Now, in Act 2, the power axes aren't as prominent, though they are very good, but I think just how powerful these endgame items are and how universal they are because of how much extra scaling they get, I think that just throws them up into the top tier anyway, and it's hard to argue otherwise. So for me to put it anywhere below this would just do discredit to how strong they are in the end game, though in the early game you're probably going to be using power swords, and at the start of the game it's definitely going to be sort of your chain swords. But I think when it comes to terms of end game items, these guys are right up there. As things have moved on and we now have more builds and more access to 4 swords, especially with the 12 4 sword upgrade, I still think they're top tier, and we have had a lot of Drukhari upgrades, and these builds are going to be open to making agility scaling possible for warriors that can then abuse Desolation, as well as finesse for those sorts of builds. Now, there is a lot of talents that go into it, but the fact that they are so strong on Blade Dancer, arguments could be made to swap these guys around both ways. So I would say not to get too hung up on the placement. You could even say that they're equal in some cases, and on specifically for Psyker builds these are stronger, but you do have access to things like Warp Surge Brooch and Hand of Offense that will allow 4 swords to outperform it. But like I said, don't get too hung up on that. But some of the effects that you have in these Drukhari weapons, like Severed Hand, some of the AoE effects that you'll get on some of the other ones, yeah, that's just really strong. And we did get a lot more Act 4 and Act 5 upgrades, and we now see more of them coming available in Act 4, so this makes these Drukhari swords really good. Even the non-toxin variants, such as the Jin Blade of Bloodthirst and even the Insatiable Jin Blade, are also really strong. I didn't represent them separately from the regular Drukhari swords, so do keep in mind those swords are included in this placement. When it comes to Psyker staffs, so Owlcat said they fixed them. What they did was make them worse. I think these unarguably go straight down to here. So let me just catch you up for those of you who might not be in the know. So the powers on Psyker staffs are melee abilities. They get boosted by melee talents and they get used by melee abilities. You can use Reckless Strike on any of these Psyker staff powers. Things like Crowd Kill will apply, Easy Target will apply, and all the other goodies from melees will apply to the powers here. They did previously also get weapon skill to criticals on pyromancy staffs, and they also got strength scaling to damage. Alcat fixed that and nerfed that, so they can't get the weapon skill to critical chance anymore, and they don't get the strength scaling to damage, which has greatly weakened all of their builds. The only thing that's actually stopped them dropping down a tier is just how powerful the Sanctified Staff is. Now, yes, I know that is a niche weapon, but any Santic build using Sanctified Staff and stacking Resolve, even if you don't use it on the insane crazy builds like the Star Child, it's game-breaking OP. You can see other YouTubers making clickbait videos doing 100k, and if people that don't optimize their build are able to drop 100k, and then people that do optimize their builds are able to drop 100k in Act 2, it's hard to not see how powerful they are. Arguments can now be made for Pyrostaffs using Confident Approach, because that way you get auto crit on the fireballs, but I do feel like the loss to strength scaling on them and the loss of weapon skill to get critical chances made them a lot weaker. The other Pyromancy Staffs don't get that benefit, and I think the Pyromancy Staffs can still be dodged if you don't have high enough perception, but I haven't tested that too much. But yes, I definitely think these have dropped down. Now, the final discussion that needs to be had for this video is the top tier. I'm going to say that Heavy Bolters now outscale Roxors. Now, the reason for this is not just because of how insane Priest is to be able to do like 360k bursts, and yes, Roxors still do have infinite potential scaling. However, the average build got a lot weaker, mostly because Scourging Strikes no longer applies to them. Yes, you can now use them better on an Arc Militant build because you can stack versatility with them, but they did lose from their main setup. Now, Heinrichs famously has a build that I did over 1 million damage per hit with, which is using the Bloody Pact to sacrifice HP for AP, so during Daring Breach and Finest Hour, you can make an exceptional amount of attacks, and with those exceptional amount of attacks, you can stack infinite damage. However, nothing really sees that damage to scale from it. Heavy Bolter, however, has access to the Blessed Bolter casing. There is a hidden ability on the Blessed Bolter casing which prevents enemies from dodging, so your single shots can never miss and they can't be dodged. If you use Firearm Mastery when you have above 20, you get 23 attacks, which would normally clear the entire encounter, whilst also building Zeal to be able to do insane amounts of burst. Artificer's Power Armor, you can do 1 AP burst, so if you've built up to 30 rate of fire, you click that Firearm Mastery. For 1 AP, you can then burst fire, and between each of those burst fires, you can be firing 3 shots that can't be dodged. The damage is just impeccable. That makes, for me, currently in just a scale of weapons, Heavy Bolter the best. Now, we might be able to argue that the Arc Militant Heavy Gunner isn't the strongest build in the game, and you could try and argue for maybe the Roxor Psyker build, but overall, it's the highest damaging weapon that doesn't require the build specifically to do it, and it is the best target for using stuff like the Compensator Gloves, so much so that taking the Compensator Gloves away from Argenta feels like you're nerfing the whole party. But this is where we are. This is where my thoughts and opinions are on the current weapon tier list. Let's see what you all think. I would say that I've been quite fair, and I've even argued each individual point. So if you are going to argue that you don't feel like somewhere is tiered where it should be, do refer back to the arguments I've made for each individual weapon, and then explain why you think it outperforms other things in the same tier list, and it performs the same as those above it, or if it needs to move below, the same for going the other way. I've been Revan619. I am looking forward to very healthy discussions in the comments below. I'll see you all next time.